So, New Mutants has finally been released after sitting on the shelf for around 2.5 years. For those who don't know, this movie was filmed in 2017 and has had multiple release dates that all got cancelled. Why? Well, various reasons, some of which are somewhat strange and unclear. Now, the X-Men movie franchise has been around for 2 decades now, and in that time, we've had some hits, and we've had some misses. And honestly, despite New Mutants now being considered one of the misses, I'd say it's not that bad. It's definitely better than The Last Stand and X-Men Origins Wolverine. I'd argue it's mostly better than Apocalypse, and admittedly, I, like most people, didn't actually bother to watch Dark Phoenix, so I can't compare it to that one. Also, if you want me to review any of those, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. But today's review is not just going to be asking what went wrong with the writing, but rather what went wrong behind the scenes of New Mutants and how did that affect the movie. The film is about a young woman named Dani Moonstar whose entire home is destroyed in some kind of mysterious attack. She wakes up in a strange hospital setting and is told she was the sole survivor, having only survived due to having manifested mutant powers. Dani learns she's in a facility for young mutants, most of whom are struggling to control their powers, being run by a woman named Dr. Reyes, who is herself a mutant capable of conjuring force fields, which she's using to keep them all trapped inside a giant dome. While Dr. Reyes insists she's trying to help them, it soon becomes clear that the unseen superiors she keeps referring to do not have the young mutants' best interests at heart, as Dani's powers of being able to bring people's worst fears to life begin to manifest, and prove her to be, in the corporation's eyes, more trouble than she's worth. So who are our new heroes then? Dani herself is honestly a little bland. While she has very interesting powers, we don't really get to see her struggle with them, given she's often unconscious when using them. She is just kind of the typical boring everyman hero who's there to react to the world along with the audience, and despite the immense trauma she's gone through, she often doesn't show a great deal of emotion. Though, if there is one positive I will give her, it's her relationship with fellow mutant Rain. Rain is probably the best character of the bunch, and I feel Maisie Williams does give a pretty good performance. She's a young Scottish Christian who is abused by an evil reverend because of her werewolf-like powers. She's the first person at the facility to be kind to Dani, and this blossoms into a romance, which is, in my opinion, one of the better parts of the movie. The characters have a lot of natural chemistry, and unlike many superhero movie couples, their romance is actually enjoyable to watch and root for, as opposed to just being a boring necessity. As for the other characters, well, there's Sam, a Kentuckian miner who is brought to the facility after his rocket propulsion powers caused a terrible accident in the mines, and Roberto, a rich kid with the power to completely engulf himself in flames, which can trigger uncontrollably and burn people alive if he isn't careful. While these two characters are fine, they are perhaps a little underdeveloped, especially Roberto, who doesn't have a great deal of screen time and was also apparently race-washed, to the point where an original writer of the series was actually quite pissed off about it. And all I can really say to that is, fair enough, he has the right to be mad. And then there's Ileana, who is a bit of a problematic character in more ways than one. For starters, she's somewhat inconsistent. One minute she's a horrible bully who comes across as a genuine antagonist, then the next she'll merely be a grouchy member of the team who's just a bit of a troublemaker. Now, going from a bully to a straight-up team player is fine, except there's not really a transition from one to the other. She'll just be a bully one minute, then fine the next. And when she is acting like a bully, she's so genuinely cruel and unpleasant, going as far as to hurl racist abuse at Dani and mock her dead father. And yeah, later on we find out she has a horrible traumatic backstory and acts out because of it, but, you know, so does Sam, yet he doesn't feel the need to be a racist bully all the time. I get that they were trying to make her the edgy teen jerk, but sometimes a character's jerkish behaviour can go too far. And her treatment of Danny does make it hard to like her, even when she does bust out her cool powers to save the group. But aside from Ileana, the characters are mostly fine, so what's the problem? Well, let's talk about the tone, because the film has a bit of an identity crisis going on. See, this film was marketed as a superhero horror movie, and that's not a bad idea. In fact, the idea of a bunch of young folks trapped in a facility with no means of escape, combined with them having uncontrollably deadly powers that can manifest without warning, has a lot of potential. But the potential is never truly grasped because, honestly, this film feels like it was made by someone who is good at making movies, just not horror movies. Okay, it's time to talk about the troubled production. I will say now, I don't necessarily know how much of what I'm about to talk about is true, since a lot of the information is kinda muddled, and it's possible I'm gonna leave some things out, or some of it could later be proven false. I'm simply going by what I've read. From what I understand, it really sounds like the studio might have flipped and flopped about as to whether or not they wanted a straight horror film. The first cut was reportedly toned down and a bit muted, according to director Josh Boone, but then, following the major success of It, combined with the positive reception of the more horror-focused trailer, the studio then wanted a full-on horror movie and demanded reshoots. Now, it's been said that despite these reshoots being constantly talked about as a major excuse for the delayed release, they never actually took place. I'm not entirely sure why. I'm assuming the acquisition of Fox by Disney had something to do with it, but we can't say for certain. That said, I believe the film was still very much re-edited, especially given there are scenes in the trailer that do not appear in the movie. Question is, should the reshoots have happened? Well, yes and no. See, the film isn't particularly scary. One of the key factors of horror is subtlety, and the scenes in this movie that are attempting to be scary are so unsubtle, obvious, and in your face. That's not how it works. If you want fear, things should be quiet and tense. There should be more focus on the mystery of what's going on. The moments where we see the supervisors monitoring the mutants actually does kind of accomplish this, since we don't actually see who they are, but we know they're in complete control and watching everything. Sometimes what you don't see is more important than what you do see. The conjured up fear monsters, however, aren't particularly scary. There's no real mystery or subtlety to them, and on top of that, it's hard to feel terrified for characters who have literal superpowers. Like, we know they can quite easily kill the weird smiley monsters Danny accidentally conjures up. There's a moment that almost works, where Roberto is attacked by a mysterious figure on fire. If that had been the woman he burned, and she was screaming and begging him to save her, then that could have actually been harrowing and scary, since even superheroes can be broken by psychological horror, and such a sight would actually be distressing. But instead, it's just a person on fire who walks towards him menacingly. But while this film wasn't very scary, I do question if it could have been made scary, all things considered. Since, as I say, I don't think the people working on it really understood what makes horror work. No disrespect to the director Josh Boone, but it seems he's never worked on a horror movie before. In fact, he seems a lot more well versed in romance, which does explain why the romance was a better part of the movie. I think if you were gonna aim for a horror movie, you'd need a writer and director who's worked on that sort of film before, and understands that in order for something to be scary, you do need the subtlety and the tension building, not just in-your-face monsters attacking without any real build-up. Don't get me wrong, the film does try at times, but the scare attempts often fall flatter than jokes in an Adam Sandler movie. As I say, Josh Boone is good at writing romance, but unless he was holding back and really could have shown his stuff had the reshoots gone through, I don't think he's especially good at writing horror. So yeah, this movie wasn't a terrible movie per se, but it's clear some things did go wrong, so of course we come to the usual question of how I'd put them right. Well, to begin with, I would have made Rain the main character. Maisie Williams, I feel, is the best actor of the bunch, and I feel she would have done a better job of carrying the movie. Plus, given Danny is the source of the horror, I think it would be better to keep her more mysterious and not in full focus. Keep the romance the same because, as I said, I do think that was done better than in a lot of superhero movies. But have Danny be a lot more anxious about her powers and reserved about what happened. And make the tone more tense and mysterious. Have some scenes that are a lot quieter. Make a bigger deal out of whether or not the characters are hallucinating, so that when Rain is actually physically hurt by one of the manifestations, it's a serious game changer. And honestly, I'd say don't have the scene where Ileana is able to drug and knock out Dr. Reyes, since it kind of takes away from her as a villain and makes her look weak. She's much better off and much more intimidating if she's portrayed as being completely in control. The original film makes her out to be the secondary villain to the Superiors, who never actually appear because they were likely being planned for the sequel, and so she's kind of a weaker antagonist as a result. I'd say keep the aforementioned Superiors in the story, but make her a solid Nurse Ratched style villain in control nonetheless. Oh, and also don't make Ileana a racist bully, it just isn't necessary. Of course, I won't lie, while this is what I would do, I'm not a horror writer either. But if there's one thing I would say though, if I were the producer of this movie and I wanted a horror movie, I'd have given it to someone who can write horror. In fact, in my eyes, the perfect candidate would have been Guillermo del Toro. He's proven he can make good comic book movies, good horror movies, and even good romance. Is there a lesson to be learned here? Well, if you're gonna make a movie, or indeed any kind of story, make up your mind as to what tone and genre you want beforehand, and don't flip-flop throughout post-production. New Mutants didn't need to be held back so long. Unless the first cut was X-Men 3 levels of bad, the newer cut didn't really need so much time wasted on it. And I feel like a lot of the backlash towards the movie isn't because it's a bad movie so much as because the hype lasted too long. And then it all seemed to die as it was released 2.5 years later, right after the X-Men franchise had basically died already, in the midst of the great awfulness of 2020 where no one really wants to go to the cinema. And that, my friends, is precisely what went wrong. Thanks for watching the video. What were people's thoughts on this movie? Because, like I said, I didn't think it was that bad, but I'm very open to others' opinions on it. And as I said, if you want me to take a look at some of the other X-Men flops, please let me know which ones down below. Like, share and subscribe and all that jazz, and I hope to speak to you again soon. Goodbye!